Chapter 12 Molly's New Plan. That night, Daniel could barely sleep. He kept replaying the day over and over in his head. The meeting with Herman Plunkett. The drawings of the shroud. It was the same shadow that had taken Simon's powers away. The same shadow that had looked Daniel in the face. He was sure of it. Daniel suspected that he was the only boy in the history of Nobles Green who could remember seeing that shadow. But what did it mean? Somehow, Herman Plunkett had drawn the face of their enemy over half a century ago, and today, the only surviving pictures of the shroud were Herman's own sketches. He'd said himself they were one of a kind. A crazy thought took root in Daniel's head. Could Herman Plunkett, that shriveled old man, in fact be the shroud? Looking back on it now, he found that things that once had seemed mundane took on sinister meanings. What had Plunkett really meant with all that stuff about the death of Sherlock Holmes? Was he trying to warn Daniel? To threaten him? In stories, the villain often liked to toy with the hero, to play a game of cat and mouse before the final pounce. But that was in stories, and stories could not be trusted. In stories, good always triumphed over evil, and like so many other children, Daniel had seen enough of the real world to know that that was not always true. The next morning he awoke groggy, and his bad arm stayed asleep. Once he tried to move it around, the blood came back to his arm, and he winced as 1,000 little needles pricked his skin. Because of the cast, he couldn't even massage the life back into it. All he could do was pound his fist into his pillow and say a bad word or two, which he did very, very quietly. He finished his breakfast quickly, and he was ready to leave earlier than usual. His mother was already at the hospital visiting Graham, and his father was running late for work while trying to get Georgie ready for daycare, so Daniel didn't linger. Consequently, he was early to the bus stop, at first. While he was waiting for the others to show up, he rehearsed what he might say to Molly. If the shoe were on the other foot, she would probably start off with a silent treatment, but Daniel didn't have the patience for that. For once, he would do the talking, and she would listen. He had risked his own life for her plan, and she hadn't even the decency to come by and say thank you. He would need a cut to the chase before she could accuse him of whatever crazy thing that in her mind he had done wrong. He would need to talk fast and loud, and he planned on gesturing to his broken arm a lot for effect. After he had put Molly in her place, then he would tell Rowan about Herman Plunkett in the shroud, and he might let Molly listen in. As it happened, Molly and Rowan arrived at the bus stop together. As soon as he saw them approaching, he made a big show of looking the other way. After all, he didn't want Molly to think he had been waiting for her. He made sure that his broken arm was facing her as well, just for good measure. "Hey, Daniel." It was Molly's voice which surprised him. He expected her to let Rowan do the talking. At first, anyway. Daniel tried to look surprised. "Oh, I didn't see you guys coming." That was as far as Daniel got, because when he turned around, he saw the one thing he had never expected. Molly was shamefaced. She wasn't bawling. There was no heaving sobs or anything, but her face was red, and there was definitely the early signs of tears in her eyes, and the slight quiver in her lip. Daniel stole a glance at Rowan, who just gave one of his "what do I know" shrugs. Said Daniel, not part of his planned speech. "I'm sorry," whimpered Molly. "Your arm and Simon, it's all my fault, and I'm so sorry. I wasn't even brave enough to come and visit you." "No, hey, it's okay, it's not your fault, really, not at all," said Daniel. Man, I'm a pushover, he thought. All it takes is a couple of tears. Crud, he thought, but he knew what he had to do next. Awkwardly, he put his one good arm around her. "It's not your fault, Molly, really, it's not. And I think I know whose fault it is, because I've met him now. Twice." Molly wiped at her nose with the back of her hand. Daniel watched as she pulled herself together and the old Molly came back to life, the Molly that was itching for a fight with someone. As for Rowan, he just smiled with pride. "Well, what do you know? That's our detective for you." On the bus ride to school, Daniel filled them in on his meeting with Herman Plunkett and his discovery of the shroud. He had Plunkett's portfolio in his backpack, and both Molly and Rowan practically shuddered when they saw the cover of the issue 77. Daniel described again the shadow he had seen in Simon's bedroom, and no one could deny the eerie similarity to the image depicted in Plunkett's drawing. Selling them on the idea that this little old man might be, in fact, the shroud was another matter, and Daniel accepted that they had a right to be skeptical. After all, he wasn't sure what he believed himself, but Plunkett was the only lead they had, and Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the old artist than he let on. As usual, Molly pointed out the obvious. If Plunkett was somehow in league with this Shroud, then it didn't make much sense to just hand his portfolio. The only real piece of evidence they had over to Daniel, Rowan agreed, that it was an odd move. But he was more concerned with why Plunkett would be terrorizing the children of Nobles Green. What could an old comic book illustrator gain from it? To put it in detective terms, they had a suspect but no motive. Whoever the Shroud was, whatever it was, it had stolen the powers of hundreds of children over the years, and it had taken their memories. Memories of time spent with friends. Memories of doing remarkable things, of helping people. It was a kind of violence what it did, and that Daniel was certain. As they arrived at school, they were confronted with another problem. What to do about Eric. His birthday was just a few weeks away, and the plan had been to keep him in the dark until they had enough proof to convince him. But now, even with Plunkett's drawings in hand, they couldn't be sure how Eric would react. He believed in the legend of Johnny so strongly, with such conviction. To him, the old stories of the comic books revealing a greater purpose to their powers, to their lives, the story of Johnny Noble promised a future, that they could all grow up to be heroes if they tried hard enough. The bright, shining legacy of Johnny Noble was just a way of life to Eric. How would he take the news that the truth might be something far darker, a thing shrouded in shadow? As it happened, when they got off the bus, Eric was waiting for them, leaning next to the school doors as groups of bustling students pushed and shoved their way past. Eric folded his arms across his chest and looked Daniel in the eye. "Man, you are trouble, Corrigan." Daniel blanched. Even Rowan took a step backward, bumping right into Molly. "What are you talking about?" asked Daniel, his voice going an octave too high. "Where's the Phillies cap I sent to the hospital? You know how hard it was for me to even touch that thing, much less buy one for you?" Daniel breathed a sigh of relief. Of course, Nobles Green didn't have a Major League Baseball team, so Eric had chosen the nearby Pittsburgh Pirates as his. Their main rivals just happened to be Daniel's team, the Phillies. "It's at home. Although I appreciate the gift, I didn't really want to wear it in front of you. Reminds you how sucky the Pirates are doing this season and all." Eric smiled. "Thoughtful of you. How's the arm feeling?" "Itches, but otherwise it's okay." "Must have been a heck of a tree that you fell out of. What were you doing climbing a tree at night anyway?" Daniel stuttered. Molly stepped in. "'Cause I dared him to," she said. "So it's really all my fault." "Well, I think he's got the share of blame for going along with one of your crazy ideas. I thought you'd know better by now, Daniel." "Yeah, well, you know me, always showing off." Eric smiled again, but Daniel thought he caught a flash of something else on his face. He told himself that he was just being paranoid, but for a split second, he thought he saw Eric give him a look that he hadn't seen before. Whether Rowan saw it too, Daniel didn't know, but it was Rowan who changed the subject. "Have you spoken to Simon much?" he asked. Now Eric definitely seemed troubled, and he had made no effort to hide it. "Not at all. He barely seems to know who I am. He's a lot worse than any of the others. It's like not only doesn't he remember the powers, he doesn't remember us. He knows who I am, but he doesn't seem to remember that I'm his friend." Michael drifted away, but this is different, more sudden. It's like he's never even knew us. No one said anything after that. Eric's birthday was next, but with the exception of Rose, they were all getting close. Losing their powers and the memory of ever having powers was bad enough, but losing the memories of your friends altogether was something else. This was a new kind of terror. The ringing of the first bell kept them from dwelling on these maudlin thoughts. Sorry, that's a weird word. As the entirety of grades 4 through 6 scrambled to get to class on time. Daniel had almost reached homeroom when Molly grabbed him by his good arm, thankfully, and pulled him behind a stairwell. "Hey, what are you doing? I'm going to be late." "We have to do something, Daniel." Her eyes were wild with anger. Gone was the humbled Molly from an hour ago. The old Molly was back now, and there was no one to save Daniel from her this time. "Right now? Molly, the bell just rang. Snyder will kill us." "You heard Eric. It's different now. It's worse. Eric is going to forget about us. Eventually, we'll all forget." Daniel tried to take his arm back, but Molly held on tight. He tried to look as if it weren't a struggle, but it was. He was caught. "We don't know that for sure, Molly. It might just be Simon." You don't believe that, Daniel. The Shroud saw you. He knows that we know about him, and this is his punishment. It's not fair. The halls were emptying now, the last few stragglers running for their classrooms, hoping to make it before the second bell. We can talk about this later. No. Molly's group loosened, and Daniel took his arm back, but he didn't bolt away. There was something that kept him there. Molly's face, a determination in her eyes, that kept him there. Just as surely as if she had pinned him to the floor. You don't get it, do you? Eventually, there won't be any of us left to remember. Only you. You'll have all these memories, all these friendships, and we won't even know who you are. The second bell rang, and the hallway was quiet except for the sound of shutting doors. Molly was quiet too. All right, Daniel said. What do you want me to do? Tell your parents that we're doing homework together at my house after school. That shouldn't be a problem. Why? We're going to the other side of Mount Noble. We're going to the old quarry. The old quarry? But the rules! Well, we'll just have to break the rules again. We need answers, Daniel, and we're running out of time. Please. For Eric? Daniel swallowed hard and nodded. Molly nodded back, and Daniel watched as she turned and strode down the hall, her head held high. Molly Lee was once again a girl on a mission, and strangely enough, Daniel was glad. It suited her. Daniel followed her, but he didn't rush. He was already late. A few seconds more wouldn't matter. As he walked, he remembered that first day in the treehouse and reading off the rules. The north face and the old quarry are off limits. Danger waits for us there. Danger waits for us there. Today, Daniel was very homesick for Philadelphia. Okay, I got through that. I made a lot of mistakes. Thank you for sticking with me. If you enjoyed this audiobook, then hit that subscribe button, like this video. I'll see you in the next time.